Good morning, YouTube. I thought for this video I'd take you for a walk down Claire's block number 6 in my orchard, possibly vying for the dubious honour of being the least well-performing block during this season. Most of the trees you see here were planted in 2006, but they're really quite stunted and sickly, partly because they were malnourished for years. We then had Phytophthora set in, or not we, the previous owner, then had Phytophthora set in and caused a sort of a vicious circle in which the roots of the trees were infected with Phytophthora and then couldn't recover until we treated them. And now they can start accepting the food that they've been given, and there's some nice areas of regrowth on otherwise unhappy trees. The other thing about block 6 here is that it's contour planted. So rather than be in a straight line like many macadamia farms, it was planted to follow the shape of the slope that it was on. And according to one agronomist, that's actually a good way of dealing with slopes rather than just plant in straight lines, because it helps work against erosion and also minimises the slope that machinery has to deal with by creating these chicanes like the one you see in front of you now. Anyway, the inspiration for this video, funnily enough, came from my barista at Federal, Moonshine Espresso. He makes some of the best coffee I've ever drunk, and it's kept me alive here. Ronnie, his name is, great big black beard, lovely friendly guy. Last time I went for a coffee from him, he said, "Oh, we've just been talking about you." The shop was empty. I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, No, the customers who just left, they were asking about macadamia farms, and I told them that you were a macadamia farm who came here for coffee, and they had all these questions I couldn't answer. So we both ran out onto the road to try and find these customers, caught them in their car, they got out, and they grilled me for about 15 minutes on what it would be like to live next to a macadamia farm and what the potential pitfalls would be. Because they, like a couple of other retiree couples, were looking for property in the area, and there are a few small lots of land that in the 80s and I think the early 90s were carved off from farms for farmers to make a bit of money selling to tree changers. And so there is a market there, and there's a few little 5-acre lots which go for a lot of money because they're rare, almost as much as the big farms do. And they wanted to know, look, if we buy a place in between macadamia farms like this, what can we expect? And I thought, that's a really good question, because real estate agents probably won't give them a straight answer. So I will come on here and give them a straight answer. Living next to a macadamia farm, there are obviously some compromises, and that is these farmers need to work their land, and they need to do it at times and dates which they can't necessarily give you in advance. Very dependent on the weather. I'm hoping to get a harvest done this week, but of course it's entirely rain dependent, and when they do show up, they might well show up at 7:30, 8 a.m. and start harvesting. Harvesters make a noise, probably wouldn't be enough to wake a neighbour, but there is a whirring sound. Same thing sound-wise with spray units. Again, a bit of a whooshing sound. Mowing obviously makes a mowing sound, and that's a fairly common activity on a macadamia farm. And things like tree work, you can hear the sounds of chainsaws, that sort of thing. All I would say, I'm sure I've left some sounds out, but grouping them all together, these things don't happen for long, and they don't happen very often. 90% of the time, a macadamia farm is a very peaceful place to live next to. But the concern of this elderly couple wasn't so much the noise, it was the chemicals. And they're worried in particular about what pesticides and fungicides that macadamia farmers use that might be detrimental to their health. if spray drifts over their property. Now, this is something the Australian Macadamia Society takes very seriously, and it's true of all chemicals used by macadamia farmers that the permission to use them is only ever temporary, and it's constantly under review for environmental impacts, impacts on bees, impacts on humans and human health. And so, while in the 80s almost anything went, the list of pesticides and fungicides has narrowed substantially from what it used to be, and in particular chemicals which can get into the soil and don't biodegrade, or chemicals that have a long-lasting effect in terms of killing insects and obviously potentially harming humans and other animals, have been outlawed. Can't use them anymore. And if you look up old documentation on macadamia growing and what stuff is used for what particular purpose, you see some nasty old chemicals like endosulfan, which just aren't usable anymore. The other, and obviously over time there's new pesticides and herbicides released, and the environmental focus on them is front and centre because they just won't get approval to be used if they have any soil residual effects or anything like that. Now, every macadamia farm is a little bit different in terms of what they choose to use or what their agronomist might recommend for them. There are some varieties of tree that need more fungicide than others, and that's something that a purchaser of a property next door, you're not going to know the difference between one kind of macadamia and the other. And of course you could grill the farmers next door and get their word on what they use and can't use, but what if they sell to somebody else? And so this elderly couple was naturally a bit anxious. They loved the idea of living amongst all the greenery, but what if the chemicals harm me? One other thing you need to know, though, when it comes to spraying in particular, is that macadamia farmers must keep meticulous records of their spray activity. And by meticulous, I mean the date, the time, the wind strength, the wind direction. Mainly because you're not allowed to spray when the wind is more than about 6 or 7 kilometres an hour, and in general they want it to be completely still so that spray drift doesn't occur. It's not just for the safety of the neighbours, it's also for the effectiveness of the spray. You want the stillest possible atmosphere in which to operate so that that spray can get to the top of the tree and not go anywhere else where the value of it would just go to waste. So there are a lot of inbuilt protections developed over many years where the Australian Macadamia Society in particular, very jealous of its reputation for being clean and green. They don't want things like spray drift onto neighbouring properties, and they want proof, auditable proof, not just the farmer's assurance, that they go to those lengths to make sure, it doesn't drift. So in theory, any farmer would need to demonstrate when asked what their record of spraying is and where it was sprayed. So, and the record keeping, of course, protects the farmer as well. If there are complaints of spray drift, they're able to pull up their records and say, well, look, my neighbour to the east can't have had any spray drift that day because winds were coming from the east and blowing away from their property at the time spray happened. And you'll find that is binding on not only the farmers but the contract sprayers as well, who can get themselves in a fair bit of trouble and cop very hefty fines if they don't follow the rules. So, to say hand on heart, living next to a macadamia farm you would get no spray drift guaranteed is too much. You can't. No one can give that guarantee. Once you spray something in the air, it can move. However, the way the regulations are and the rigour with which they're enforced, and the fact that the products now are restricted to such soft chemicals, if you like, ones with no residual effect, ones which biodegrade on impact with the soil. These are things that give you that reassurance that whatever is sprayed, even if there was drift, it wouldn't be harmful to that human health. In terms of Nutkin Farm, I've always picked the softer chemicals, and they've worked perfectly so far. And by soft chemicals, I mean, in the case of a pesticide, if it hits the insect when it's sprayed, it'll kill the insect. If it doesn't hit the insect, it doesn't do anything. It immediately biodegrades, which means that foraging bees are safe because you spray early in the day before the bees come out. And you've also, got the fact that there is no residual that happens as well. Same thing with the fungicides. There are a couple of nastier fungicides still on the market, but not ones that affect human health according to testing. I'm a big favour of just plain copper-based fungicide, which has been used for ages and ages and actually helps to redress any copper deficiency that you may have in your trees. It's not as strong as some of the systemic fungicides that get into the leaf itself, but it's been, at least for the last season, more than adequate. Now here you can see a little bit of, just to digress, a little bit of out of season flowering on this particular tree, which can happen in winter. Sometimes the trees get a little bit anxious to get on with the next season, and they do a bit of out of season flowering. It's not really good news because it can't really turn into nuts. It's just too early for any nut set to actually turn into nuts. You need heat for that. But it happens a bit. It doesn't stop it from flowering in spring as well when it's meant to flower. Anyway, I think I answered this elderly couple's questions on living next to a macadamia farm, and I think they had fairly realistic expectations. But if you're watching this video planning on buying a property next to a macadamia farm, there are these things that come with the territory. There's a bit of noise from time to time from machinery because it is a mechanised business, and like I said, there is some spraying that happens. There's occasionally a burn off as well, burning off foliage that happens in winter if it's not being mulched up. But on average, a neighbouring macadamia farmer should be a nice thing. Certainly very good in terms of the atmosphere and the greenery and everything else. And if they let you on your farm to pick up a few nuts, well, that's pretty good too. And the Australian macadamia industry, I think, would wholly endorse this message, given that we promote ourselves relative to other countries as clean and green, and that we don't want any issues with anything to do with pollution. My own personal reassurance is that I have several families of platypus in my dam, which is down the hill there at the centre of my property. And platypuses only tolerate the purest of water. And because they're thriving and continue to thrive in my dam, they're clearly happy with the water that they're getting. And that would suggest to me that there's no runoff. There can't really be from the chemicals I'm using. And because my fertilisers are largely organic and don't leach into the soil quickly, they let go their nutrients slowly. They don't enter the water table either. So I hope this answers any questions from prospective buyers next to macadamia farms. If you do go ahead and buy, enjoy. Have a good relationship with your neighbour. If you want to be kept informed, I'm sure they'll keep you informed of the things that they're doing. And if you want to take precautions, well, yes, you can by all means do that if it makes you feel safer. Thanks for watching today, guys. I will be back again soon with another video, and I hope you stay well and safe. Bye.